Frameworks for Improvement. Welcome to the second in our series of 4 webinars. In webinar 2, Frameworks for Improvement, we'll look at commonly used improvement frameworks, the Model for Improvement, Clinical Audit, the Plan, Do, Study, Act cycle, and Significant Event Analysis. All involve systematic analysis of current practice, reflection on what we're trying to achieve, and action to effect change. The Institute for Healthcare Improvement's Model for Improvement asks 3 simple questions. What are we trying to achieve? How will we know if we have improved? And what changes can we make to improve? These questions provide the basis for the next 2 frameworks we'll discuss, the Clinical Audit Cycle and PDSA or Plan, Do, Study, Act cycles. Clinical audit is a systematic process involving the following stages. First, identify the problem or issue. This involves selecting an audit topic which should answer the question what needs to be improved and why. This is likely to reflect national or local standards and guidelines where there's definitive evidence about effective clinical practice. The topic should focus on areas where problems have been encountered in practice. Next, define criteria and standards. Audit criteria are explicit statements that define what elements of care are being measured. For example, patients with asthma should have a care plan. The standard defines the level of care to be achieved for each criterion. For example, care plans have been agreed for over 80% of patients with asthma. Standards are usually agreed by consensus, but may also be based on published evidence or the results of a previous local, national or published audit. Next, we monitor performance. To ensure that only essential information is collected, details of what is to be measured must be established from the outset. Sample sizes for data collection are often a compromise between statistical validity of the results and the resources available for data collection and analysis. Compare performance with criteria and standards. This stage identifies differences between actual results and the standards set. Were the standards met? And if not, why not? Implement change. Once the results of the audit have been discussed, an agreement must be reached about recommendations for change. We use an action plan to record these recommendations. This should include who has agreed to do what and by when. Each point needs to be well defined, with an individual named as responsible, and an agreed timescale for its completion. Finally, we need to complete the cycle to sustain improvements. After an agreed period, the audit should be repeated. The same strategies for identifying the sample methods and data analysis should be used to ensure comparability with the original audit. The re-audit should demonstrate that any changes have been implemented and that improvements have been made. Further change may then be required, leading to additional re-audits. Clinical audits can be recorded using a simple template consisting of the title, the reason for the choice of topic, dates involved, criteria to be audited and standards set, the results of the data collection, summary of discussions and changes agreed, and finally the results of the second data collection. The slide shows an example of a clinical audit for management of obesity. The Plan, Do, Study, Act cycle involves repeated, rapid, small-scale tests of change carried out in sequence or in parallel. In sequence, changes are tested one after another, whereas in parallel, different groups or people test different changes. These are tested to see whether and to what extent the changes work before implementing one or more of these changes on a larger scale. So the following stages are involved. Plan. Develop a plan for the change to be tested or implemented. Make predictions about what will happen and why, and develop a plan to test the change. We need to consider who, what, when, where, and what data need to be collected. Do involves carrying out the test by implementing the change. In study, we look at data before and after the change. Usually this involves using run or control charts together with some qualitative feedback. We need to compare data to the predictions made and reflect on what was learned and to summarise this. Act, we plan the next test, determining what modifications should be made. We prepare a plan for the next test and decide to fully implement one or more successful changes. Plan, do, study, act cycles can be recorded using a simple template, and we show an example on the next slide. Significant event analysis is the process by which individual cases in which there has been a significant occurrence, not necessarily involving an undesirable outcome for the patient, analyse in a systematic and detailed way to find out what can be learned about the overall quality of care and to indicate changes that might lead to future improvements. Significant event analysis improves the quality and safety of patient care by encouraging reflective learning relating to individual episodes that have been identified by a member or members of the healthcare team as significant, and where necessary, the implementation of change to minimise recurrence of adverse events or increase the likelihood of positive events. The aim of significant event analysis is to gather and map information to determine what happened, to identify problems with healthcare delivery, identify contributory factors and root causes, and agree what needs to change and implement solutions. The following 6 steps describe the process of significant event analysis. Identify and record significant events for analysis and highlight these at a suitable meeting. This enables staff to routinely record significant events using a logbook or pro forma. Next, we collect factual information, including written and electronic records, the thoughts and opinions of those involved in the event, and this may include patients or relatives and healthcare professionals based outside the practice. It's important to meet to discuss and analyse the event with all relevant members of the team. The meeting should be conducted in an open, fair, honest and non-threatening atmosphere. Notes of the meeting should be taken and circulated. Meetings should be held routinely, perhaps as part of monthly team meetings, when all events of interest can be discussed and analysed, and allow all relevant staff to offer their thoughts and suggestions. The person you choose to facilitate a significant event meeting or to take responsibility for an event analysis, again, will depend on team dynamics and staff confidence. We need to undertake a structured analysis of the event. The focus should be on establishing exactly what happened and why. The main emphasis is on learning from the event and changing behaviours, practices or systems where appropriate. And the purpose of the analysis is to minimise the chances of an event recurring. We monitor the progress of actions that are agreed and implemented by the team, and finally it's important to write up the significant event analysis once changes have been agreed, and this provides documentary evidence that the event has been dealt with. Clinical audit, plan, do, study, act cycles, and significant event analysis all involve gaining a deeper understanding and reflecting on what we're trying to achieve and what changes can be made to improve. Clinical audit and plan, do, study, act cycles use a measurement process before and after implementing one or more changes to assess whether improvement has actually occurred. In clinical audit, this is usually a single measure before and after the change, whereas plan, do, study, act cycles involve continuous repeated measures, often using statistical process control with run or control charts. The main difference between clinical audit and plan, do, study, act cycles is that audit involves implementation of change after the first measurement, followed by a further measure, whereas plan, do, study, act cycles involve continuous measurement during implementation of multiple changes in sequence. Significant event analysis should ideally lead to changes in policy or practice, but doesn't involve measuring the effects of this. Thank you for listening to this webinar. If you'd like some further information, please go to our further reading and the contact information on the slides.